The end of Title 42, a COVID-era rule that sent back migrants who came to the United States without letting them seek asylum, was supposed to cause mayhem, if you looked at the headlines. But it really hasn't, especially up here in the North Country. There are no reports of a surge of people at the northern border. However, New York City is running out of space to house asylum seekers, and it's asking for help from neighboring counties. And so far, those counties are like, nope. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day is provided by Renew Architecture and Design, designing camps, custom homes, and more throughout NCPR's listening region. Details at renewarchitecture.com.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Tuesday, May 16th. First up, after Lake Ontario came inches from flood stage last week, the sun and dry weather have changed the forecast. The lake and the St. Lawrence River are now highly unlikely to flood this spring. Here's my story on the situation. What a difference a week makes. Last week, the North Country and the whole Great Lakes region were coming off a long stretch of heavy rain. And downstream, things weren't any better.
Also a rapid melt of the snowpack in the Ottawa River Basin.
Tony David directs the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's Environment Division in Akwesasne, and he sits on the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board that keeps an eye on water levels.
And the Ottawa River Basin is a downstream connecting water body. It's a huge watershed, and the sudden rush of that melting snow resulted in major flooding within the Ottawa River watershed.
To prevent even worse flooding there and further downriver in Montreal, the board started holding back water at the hydropower dam in Messina. That was in accordance with a complex formula spelled out in a U.S.-Canada agreement. The result, though, was rising levels in Lake Ontario, almost an inch a day at one point, bringing the lake close to 248 feet when low-lying areas start to flood.
Which started to signal some concerns, not necessarily guaranteeing that we were heading towards a flood event, but
with forecasts showing a 30% chance of flooding. Worrisome enough that New York State issued an advisory and said it was readying sandbags. But then came this long stretch of sun. And now Lake Ontario appears to be reaching its peak.
And the Ottawa River freshet is post-peak, so we're over the hump, and there's a lot of downstream capacity, so we'll continue to be gradually ramping up the outflows from Lake Ontario.
The board says there's just a 2% chance of flooding now. Not impossible. Weather is unpredictable, but with another relatively mild week of weather in the forecast, highly unlikely this year. David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio. We have a downstate and a North Country perspective on the end of Title 42 today. First, downstate, where some county leaders in New York State are sounding the alarm about a growing migrant crisis that they say the federal government is failing to address. Governor Kathy Hochul says she's awaiting answers from the Biden administration. Karen DeWitt reports.
The State Association of Counties, Steve Aquario, says the state's counties are increasingly shouldering the burden of the influx of migrants over the southern border, a situation that's likely to intensify now that pandemic-era restrictions on border crossings have been lifted. And he says they need help now. They say the federal government should consider declaring a state of emergency and immediately release funds to states like New York that are bearing the brunt of the crisis.
The current situation is failing. The federal government is failing to address this crisis. We should have the basic information about the asylum seekers entering the state of New York so we could match housing needs, work needs, public assistance needs, mental health needs, legal concerns.
The counties are asking the federal government to open military bases to house and feed the migrants. They say state government leaders, including Governor Kathy Hochul, need to step up and help resolve disputes that have arisen between New York City Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat, and two Republican-led Hudson Valley counties, Orange and Rockland, where Adams planned to bus migrants to hotels. Rensselaer County Executive Steve McLaughlin, also a Republican, is one of a handful of county leaders who are prohibiting any municipality, hotel, or motel in their county from entering into a contract to house migrants.
To say that there's a plan would be a complete falsehood, because the plan seems to be Eric Adams trying to dictate to the rest of the counties in New York how he's going to do things. And that just means shipping people here without any communication to these county leaders. It's unfair, it's arrogant, and it's completely inhumane to do that.
Aquaria, with the Association of Counties, says the group is not blaming Hochul. He says the governor has written a letter to President Joe Biden, with whom she has a close professional relationship, asking for more help. But he says she could do more.
I think the governor is in the position to quarterback this issue now.
Hochul, speaking Monday at an unrelated news conference, says Biden and his aides have not yet answered her letter, written last Friday afternoon, and she's not concerned about that. But she says she's not sitting patiently by because New York City is at a breaking point.
If more time goes on, they'll certainly be hearing from me. I'll be paying a visit, continuing my regular efforts to say, help us here. This is a humanitarian crisis.
Hochul says she's working to coordinate the response between the city and the counties. She's deployed 1,500 National Guard members to help, and she says she's considering adding to the $1 billion that's already in the state budget to help care for the migrants, but so far no one knows what those costs might be. The governor says the counties are not being asked to pay for anything, just to consent to allow hotels in the regions to contract with the city of New York to house the asylum seekers. Hochul says she's also asking the federal government to waive the 100-day waiting period for work authorization. She says the migrants want jobs, and many upstate regions have a worker shortage. She says if they were able to become employed sooner, there'd be far less blowback from some county leaders over their arrival.
The upstate elected officials, who you would normally say perhaps they're not as open to this idea, if you said these individuals were ready to work and could work and go out to the farms and the hotels and the restaurants, their arms would be wide open.
The county leaders say they've also asked Senate Majority Leader and New York Senator Chuck Schumer to waive the 100-day waiting period, but they say so far they haven't received an answer. In Albany, I'm Karen DeWitt.
So St. Lawrence County has two international border crossings, one in Ogdensburg and one in Messina. Before Title 42 expired, Customs and Border Protection asked the St. Lawrence County Public Health Department to help by coordinating resources just in case they saw a big influx of new arrivals. But the Public Health Department says the influx hasn't materialized. Lucy Grindon has that story.
In preparation for the end of Title 42, U.S. Customs and Border Protection asked St. Lawrence County to help out if there was a surge in migrants. So local health officials took some supplies up to the border crossings in Ogdensburg and Messina this past December.
Like cleaning supplies, masks, limited medical supplies.
That's Jolene Munger. She's the director of the St. Lawrence County Public Health Department. She says Customs and Border Protection also told the department that they may need to send nurses to do things like administering extra tuberculosis tests and giving extra shots. But now that Title 42 has actually ended, has the Public Health Department been asked for that extra help?
No, we have not. What we've heard is that the traffic at the border has remained steady at the same levels.
All the end of Title 42 means is that normal pre-pandemic asylum policies are back in place, so people who come to this country looking for safety can no longer be immediately turned away because of COVID-19 risk. And those extra arrivals just haven't shown up. Meanwhile, on Friday, the St. Lawrence County Legislature declared a state of emergency because of the Title 42 expiration. Not because there actually is an emergency. The legislative chair said he made the declaration out of an abundance of caution. Munger says it mostly has to do with funding.
So it provides the necessary authorization for the county to receive funding or any reimbursements associated with expenses that may be incurred. Currently, funding was only made available to New York City. So if funding becomes available to the rest of the state, typically counties have to have a state of emergency in place to qualify for that.
Munger says if the county does see an influx of arrivals, the Public Health Department's partners will work with Customs and Border Protection. For example, if Ogdensburg needs medical screenings, doctors at Claxton Hepburn Hospital will provide them. And she doesn't think the preparation they did was too much.
I'd rather be prepared and not have it happen than to have it happen and not be ready for it.
Munger says they're ready to help, but so far they haven't needed to. Lucy Grindon, North Country Public Radio.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Ben Sharon of Watertown and Ursa in the Major Key of Plattsburgh. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.